Hey everybody, I'm Michael. We're going to start off at Joshua 8 today. Then the Lord said to Joshua, "Do not be afraid, do not be discouraged. Take the whole army with you and go up and attack Ai." And just for some context, they had just taken care of Achan before this because he had stolen some of the devoted things, so that was a hard chapter. All right, then the Lord said to Joshua, "Do not be afraid, do not be discouraged. Take the whole army with you and go up and attack Ai." And also, that's the reason why I routed them in the previous chapter, because Achan had stolen some of the devoted things. All right, so now they're regrouping, and God's telling them to attack Ai again. And he says, "For I have delivered into your hands the king of Ai, his people, his city, and his land. You shall do to Ai and its king as you did to Jericho and its king, except that you may carry off their plunder and livestock for yourselves. Set an ambush behind the city." So Joshua and the whole army moved out to attack Ai. This is just my sarcastic nature coming in, but it's like if Achan is now dead and in heaven or Sheol, or however the ancients would describe the life after. If Achan's like watching this now and he's seeing that God's given them the red light or the green light to plunder, I wonder if he's like, well, now you give him the green light. Like, why didn't you give him the green light before? Anyway, so Joshua and the whole army moved out to attack Ai. He chose 30,000 of his best fighting men and sent them out at night with these orders. So now, rather than like 3,000, they have 30,000 for a little town. It says, "Listen carefully. You are to set an ambush behind the city. Don't go very far from it. All of you be on alert. I and all those with me will advance on the city, and when the men come out against us, as they did before, we will flee from them. They will pursue us until we have lured them away from the city, for they will say, 'They are running away from us as they did before.' So when we flee So when we flee from them, you are to rise up from ambush and take the city. The Lord your God will give it into your hand, and when you have taken the city, set it on fire. Do what the Lord has commanded. See to it you have my orders." Then Joshua sent them off, and they went to the place of ambush and lay in wait between Bethel and Ai to the west of Ai. But Joshua spent that night with the people. Early the next morning, Joshua mustered his army, and he and the leaders of Israel marched before them to Ai. The entire force that was with him marched up and approached the city and arrived in front of it. They set up camp north of Ai, with the valley between them and the city, and Joshua had taken about 5,000 men and set them in ambush between Bethel and Ai to the west of the city. So the soldiers took up their positions with the main camp to the north of the city and ambushed to the west of it. That night Joshua went into the valley. When the king of Ai saw this, he and all the men of the city hurried out early in the morning to meet Israel in battle at a certain place overlooking the Arabah, but he did not know that an ambush had been set against him behind the city. Joshua and all Israel let themselves be driven back before them, and they fluttered toward the wilderness. All the men of Ai were called to pursue them, and they pursued Joshua and were lured away from the city. Not a man remained in Ai or Bethel who did not go after Israel. They left the city open and went in pursuit of Israel. Then the Lord said to Joshua, "Hold out toward Ai the javelin that is in your hand, for into your hand I will deliver the city." So Joshua held out toward the city the javelin that was in his hand. As soon as he did this, the men in ambush rose quickly from the position and rushed forward. They entered the city and captured it and quickly set it on fire. The men of Ai looked back and saw the smoke of the city rising into the sky, but they had no chance to escape in any direction. The Israelites who had been fleeing toward the wilderness had turned back against their pursuers, for when Joshua and all Israel saw that the ambush had taken the city and that the smoke was coming up from it, they turned around and attacked the men of Ai. Those in the ambush also came out of the city against them, so that they were caught in the middle with Israelites on both sides. Israel cut them down, leaving them neither survivors nor fugitives. But they took the king of Ai alive and brought him to Joshua. When Israel had finished killing all the men of Ai in the fields and the wilderness where they had chased them, and when every one of them had been put to the sword, all of the Israelites returned to Ai and killed those who were in it. And 12,000 men and women fell that day, all the people of Ai. For Joshua did not draw back the hand that held out his javelin until he had destroyed all who lived in Ai. But Israel did carry off for themselves the livestock and the plunder of this city, as the Lord had instructed Joshua. So Joshua burned Ai and made it a permanent heap of ruins, a desolate place to this day. He impaled the body of the king of Ai on a pole that left him there. He impaled the body of the king of Ai on a pole and left it there until evening. At sunset, Joshua ordered them to take the body from the pole and throw it down at the entrance of the city gate, and they raised a large pile of rocks over it, which remains to this day. Then Joshua built at Mount Ebal a altar to the Lord, the God of Israel, as Moses, the servant of the Lord, had commanded the Israelites. He built it according to what is written in the book of the law of Moses, an altar of uncut stones on which no iron tool had been used. On it they offered the Lord burnt offerings and sacrificed fellowship offerings. There, in the presence of the Israelites, Joshua wrote on stones a copy of the law of Moses. All the Israelites, with their elders, officials, and judges, were standing on both sides of the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord, facing the Levitical priests who carried it, and both the foreigners living among them and native born were there. Half of the people stood in front of Mount Gerizim, and half of them in front of Mount Ebal, as Moses, the servant of the Lord, had formerly commanded when he gave instructions to bless the people of Israel. Excuse me. After Joshua read all the words of the law, the blessings and the curses, just as it is written in the book of the law, there was not a word of all that Moses had commanded that Joshua did not read to the whole assembly of Israel, including the women and the children, the foreigners who lived among them. And, I think I should address my sarcasm a little bit, because I mean, it's there for good reason. Normally, a joke pops into my head when there's an elephant in the room, or there's like an 800-pound gorilla in the room that nobody's acknowledging. And I think that's true with most people who, have a good sense of humor. But like, for obvious reasons, we feel bad for Achan in the previous chapter, but we don't know the details of these stories. Like, it is within our license when we're reading the Bible to give the most charitable reading we want to God Himself, or we can give Him the most uncharitable reading. So, and of course that same choice is given to us in most interactions in life. But if we want to believe that that Jericho, there was some reason why God didn't allow Israel to plunder Jericho, if we want to believe that there was a good reason that God put down that guideline, we can, it's within our freedom to imagine that. And of course, if we want to believe that God is just an arbitrary God with his commands, and that he has really no rhyme or reason to anything, we have that freedom. I'm not saying it's good. I'm saying it is a freedom that God gives us. And of course, if we want to believe that maybe there was a specific reason why God this time let people plunder Ai, even though he didn't let people plunder Jericho, that's also within our freedom. So we'll never know some of the details of lots of these stories as we are reading the Bible, but yeah, I think that's worth mentioning. Chapter 9, after they've renewed the covenant with God at Mount Ebal, there is a Gibeonite deception, and this will probably be all that we have for today. Now, when all the kings west of the Jordan heard about the things the kings in the hill country, in the western foothills, and along the entire coast of the Mediterranean Sea, as far as Lebanon, the kings of the Hittites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, they came together to wage war against Joshua and Israel. Makes sense. They figure they're better together than separate, right? And they need all the help they can get. However, when the people of Gibeon heard what Joshua had done to Jericho and Ai, they resorted to a ruse, a deception. Ruse is not a normal word these days, but a deception is what ruse means. They went as a delegation. They went as a delegation whose donkeys were loaded with worn-out sacks and old wineskins, cracked and mended. So they made themselves look more ragged than they actually were. They put worn and patched sandals on their feet and wore old shoes. All the bread of their food supply was dry and moldy. And then they went to Joshua in the camp of Gilgal and said to him and the Israelites, "We have come from a distant country. Make a treaty with us." The Israelites said to the Hivites, "But perhaps you live near us, so how can we make a treaty with you?" "We are your servants," they said to Joshua. But Joshua asked, "Who are you and where do you come from?" They answered, "Your servants have come from a very distant country because of the fame of the Lord your God, for we have heard reports of him, all that he did in Egypt and all that he did to the two kings of the Amorites east of Jordan, and Sihon, king of Heshbon, and Og, king of Bashan, who reigned in Ashtaroth. And our elders and all those living in our countries said to us, take provisions for your journey, go and meet them and say to them, we are your servants. Make a treaty with us. Notice they didn't say anything about Jericho. Nope, it doesn't look like they did. All right, this bread of ours was worn when we packed it at home on the day we left to come to you. But now see how dirty and moldy it is, and these wineskins that we filled were new, but see how cracked they are, and our clothes and sandals are worn out from the very long journey. The Israelites sampled their provisions, but did not inquire of the Lord. Then Joshua made a treaty of peace with them to let them live, and the leaders of the assembly ratified it by oath. 3 days after they made the treaty with the Gibeonites, the Israelites heard that they were neighbors living near them. So the Israelites set out on the third day, came to their cities Gibeon, Kiriath, Baarath, and Kiriath Jearim. But the Israelites did not attack them because the leaders of the assembly had sworn an oath to them by the Lord, the God of Israel. The whole assembly grumbled against the leaders, but all the leaders answered, we had given them an oath by the Lord, the God of Israel. We cannot touch them now. This is what we will do to them. We will let them live so that God's wrath will not fall on us for breaking the oath we swore to them. They continued, let them live, but let them be woodcutters and water carriers in the service of the whole assembly. So the leader's promise to them was kept. You know, this almost reminds me, it's like it's almost like a Gentile version of Joshua's or of Jacob's deception of Isaac. Like, they were just very cunning people. They knew they didn't stand a chance in battle. So instead they put on a disguise, just like Jacob did. And they tricked the Israelites, just like Jacob tricked Esau. It's very peculiar. It's very strange how the Bible tells these stories where cunning, let's just give it the most charitable light we can, where cunning and wits is really works to the advantage of the person who uses it, even if it doesn't appear to be totally honest. And who knows what they could have done instead. Maybe they could have just begged for mercy, right? Maybe that would have been more honorable, to beg for mercy. But they chose this route instead, and I guess being a woodcutter and a water carrier is better than being dead, right? All right, so what's the lesson there? Then Joshua summoned the Gibeonites and said, why did you deceive us by saying we live a long way from you, while actually you live near us? You are now under a curse. You will never be released from service as woodcutters or carriers for the house of my God. They answered, Joshua, your servants were clearly told how the Lord your God had commanded his servant Moses to give you the whole land and to wipe out all the inhabitants from before you. So we feared for our lives because of you. And that is why we did this. Pretty plain. We are now in your hands. Do to us what seems good and right to you. So Joshua saved them from the Israelites, and they did not kill them. That day he made the Gibeonites woodcutters and water carriers for the assembly to provide for the needs of the altar of the Lord at the place the Lord would choose. And that is what they are to this day. Whew. Anyway, that is the story of the Gibeonites. Talk about a witty people. Lord, thank you for this time in your word. Thank you for anybody who's listening to this, and I just pray that you would really bless them today, give them a renewed spirit. How fun is it just to percolate in your word and see the quirky stories that are told in this really big book. Yeah, thanks again. We pray these things all in your name. Amen. All right, catch you guys later.